Hello, friends. My name is Eric Cloward, and welcome to the Stoic Coffee Break. The Stoic Coffee Break is a weekly podcast where I take aspects of Stoicism and do my best to break them down to their most important points. I share my thoughts on Stoic philosophy and my experiences, both my successes and my failures, and hope that you can learn something from them, all within the space of a coffee break. Now, this week's episode is another interview episode. I had the pleasure of interviewing J.R. Martinez. He is an Iraqi war vet and a motivational speaker, and he won the Dancing with the Stars competition just a couple of years ago. We had a fun and very interesting interview talking about all different aspects of life, overcoming challenges, and how learning how to control what you can and letting go of what you can't can make your life just that much better. So this was a really enjoyable interview. I also want to apologize that for whatever reason, Zoom switched my mic on me, so my side doesn't sound as good as it normally does because it was using my computer mic instead of my regular professional mic. So I apologize for that. Rookie mistake on my side for not checking those things. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I enjoyed making it. Thanks again for listening.
Well, first and foremost, we're human. And I think that's one of the biggest things I tell people is that, for what people think of when they think of me or what people know of me, they immediately think of like, oh, you just must wake up like Mickey Mouse, like, and everything's okay today. It's going to be a great day. And it's like, no, it's not like that. Right. And that's why
No.
you have to practice positivity daily. You have to practice, stoicism daily. You have to practice whatever it is that you follow that keeps you grounded and allows you to be able to show up in the way that you want to be able to show up. You have to practice that every day because there's going to be so many things outside of your control that are going to challenge you. And I think that's when, listen, not to get too deep into this, but I grew up in a very Catholic home. My mother, Catholic and went to church and my mother was all about, obviously God and, but we're Hispanic. So we believe in like every saint that existed. And, it's like, well, you pray to this saint because this saint does this. You pray to that saint because that saint does that. And so there's all these, you can't keep up with all of them. But I remember, one of the conflicts my mother and I had, years ago was, she talked about faith so much. And I said, faith isn't about having it and reciting scriptures and whatever sermon you heard when things are good. It's
Yeah.
about when things are challenging, it's how do you then get to that foundation that you say you have in this and pull from that. That's going to allow you to keep a level head. That's going to allow you to believe that there is, if you believe there is a being that is essentially controlling and there's all a purpose of it all, then you got to buy into that and you got to believe that. And that's always been a challenge I've had, not only with my mother and religion, but just with people in general. I'm like, people are so gun-ho about this and gun-ho about that. And then shit hits the fan and people are like, oh my God, I don't know. And it's like, okay, you're allowed to be human and grieve it and process it and have raw, real emotions about it. But then at a certain point, you have to then identify that's consuming a lot of your life, a lot of your day.
Yep.
What do I do differently? And if you like that feeling, then cool. But I'm gonna tell you one thing, don't come back to me talking about this is my anchor. Well, because when I saw shit hit the fan, that anchor didn't help you at all. That thing did
Yeah.
not stick. That thing was moving and you were being drifted off into the sea. And so, it's I think, anyways, that's one of those things JR tends to do is go on a rant for no apparent reason. Just what was on my
Yeah.
head.
Yeah. No, I understand that. So that's one of the things the Stoics talk about a lot is that it's not about upholding your principles when it's easy. It's about upholding them when it's hard. That's what's important, because anybody can do the right thing when it's easy, like, if it doesn't cost you much, it's not a struggle. It's not anything that puts you out of your way. It's not anything that really, really challenges you. Of course, you can do the right thing. But when it's challenging, when you have something before you that pushes you, tests you, that makes you really, really stay up at night, like, ethical challenges, for example, it's like, well, you could do this and you probably wouldn't get caught doing it and you would make this much amount of money, but it's not the right thing to do. You're going to be sitting there going, well, but if you have, like you said, if you have that anchor, it's not even a question. You just simply go, no, that's just not in my wheelhouse. That's not part of
Yeah.
that's not how I want to live my life. And even if it's easy money, even if I would never get caught doing that, it's still not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and when you find difficult challenges, it's the same thing. It's like, it doesn't matter how easy or how hard it is. It's like your values and your virtues aren't worth anything if they're only applicable when it's easy. And
Yeah.
I think people
Yeah.
mistake that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing. Like you were saying, they're losing their shit when, something gets hard, and it's like, well, don't you have this faith that you've been relying on, or you say is so important to you? Lean on that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many things outside of the obvious that has happened to me where I've just been like, I gotta trust. I don't know what the hell is coming up. I don't know why this happened. I don't understand this at all, but
Yeah.
I just gotta trust. And the shit sucks right now, but I just gotta trust. And it's like that thing. It's like the Gandhi quote where it says, "Oh God, I'm gonna mess it up." I hate when I do that. Like I'm like, so and so said, and then people are like, "What did he say?" or "What'd she say?" And then I'm like, "Well, I'm gonna fuck up the quote." But essentially, what they said was this, and people are like, "Oh," like it just completely loses its power, its sting. But where Gandhi said like the best way to heal was essentially to like lose yourself in other people, like doing for others.
Yeah.
And it's so true. However, I always tell people, it's like that doesn't necessarily mean that you just like you're not paying attention, you're not aware, you're not understanding the conversations and the things that are happening around you, because all of that, you're talking about software, everything, and technology is about data. Everything that we gather in the world is about data. Companies are gathering data, brands, data, getting feedback, getting information. Surveys are being sent out nonstop. Hey, Eric, what could we have done differently? Hey, JR, what did you like about this? What didn't you like about this? Data, 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 data. And the more data that you get, you essentially break all that down. It allows us to be more efficient, to be able to create a product or to maybe eliminate a product in order for to make more money, serve more people, have more success. And I tell people, I was like, I think that's one of the things that has allowed me to succeed is that yes, I have immersed myself in a lot of phases of my life trying to help other people because it felt right, not because I felt like, well, I'm going to get something out of this, like I'm going to learn something. No, it just felt the right thing to do. But in the mix of me losing myself in those people and their situations, I also was equally paying attention. I was paying attention to conversations that were being had. I was paying attention to my environment. I was paying attention to a lot of things, and all I was essentially doing, in some cases subconsciously, and I didn't realize it, I'm just gathering data. I'm just
Mm.
getting all this information, this immediate feedback of, you see, JR, when you thought this, see how this worked out for that. When you felt this, you see someone else felt this. Like, and so you have to, as much as it's good to get out of your own way and feed into and like lean into other people, it's equally important to not necessarily just means that you forget about everything and just be distracted. Like there's a
Yeah.
time and place for that as well. Like everything's just this weird balance, right? We're all really we're all gymnasts just trying to stay on the beam as long as we possibly can. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And you don't do it perfectly well, but as long as you're willing to take that hit and get your ass back up there, I think, you'll be able to stay on a little bit longer than the last time.
Well, that reminds me of what you were saying, just to kind of double back, and then we'll do the intro because we haven't done that yet. Simon Sinek talked about the best way to get somebody to solve their own problem is to have them help somebody else solve that same problem.
Yeah.
Meaning, he talks about how the best way, if somebody comes up to him and his thing is like, I don't have any friends. How do I make more friends? Well, why don't you go help somebody else learn how to make friends? It's that idea of you doing is teaching, not only to the other person, or you teaching is how you learn. And so in a way, how you serve is how you learn as well.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really interesting take because he had a friend of his who was having some problems and they would just sit and talk. And um, he found that they would have these, discussions and they would sit and talk and she would talk all about her problems, all about her problems, all about her problems. And then he found that she wasn't making much progress on this, even though they were having a weekly meeting on this. And finally, he said, how about we do this? I get, half the time is mine and I get to talk about my problems and you help me solve those. And then the other half the time is work on your problems. She's like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds good. And then within like a week and a half, she finally, because she was helping him, she was
Yeah.
then able to solve her problem. And it was
Yeah.
because she was so stuck in the me mode that when she got out of herself and started serving, then things started to fall into place. And I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so
And
we,
now, and I remember the Gandhi quote is the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. That's what it
yeah,
is. I just
nice.
had it. That wasn't for you. That was for me. It's just for
Purely ego driven. All right. So before we already kind of jumped into this, but I think we have some good stuff there, so I definitely want to keep it in. So go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell my audience what you're about, and uh, yeah, I guess just go from there.
Oh man, what is JR about? It's, one of those questions like, I've started doing yoga more frequently and I've done it over the years and it's just been sporadic, but then now at this stage of my life I'm trying to be more consistent with it just because one physically my body's like, dude, stop trying to throw these weights around. Stop trying to run
Yep.
this
Like
this distance.
20 minutes every morning.
Yeah, like just be, just move, just stretch, just use your body weight. Like I mean, it's like and and the mental and the emotional and the spiritual practice is to me is what's so incredible. And I know when you start class, at least one of the instructors, she's always like, okay, we're gonna start with a little meditation, and she always asks, what's your intention? What's your intention for these next 60 minutes? And I find myself when she poses this question, meanwhile, everyone's eyes are closed or they're staring off, like no one's really looking around the room. But in my mind, I feel like, oh my God, like I'm gonna be called on. Like there's this class participation that clearly I have PTSD from my youth of where it's like, JR, it's your turn to read. And I'm like, no, I don't want to read. Like when you're like, you anticipate that it's coming to you. So you try to read ahead just so you can kind of like, okay, work through it in your brain. And then when it gets to you, either you're off or the pressure now becomes too much and you still jack it up. But like, it's such a simple question as far as what's your intention for this class for the
Mhm.
next 60 minutes. What is your intention? And it's not a question, it's not something that I think most of us practice frequently to think about what's our attention in our relationship. What's our intention with our relationship with, if there's a partner, a friend, children, a coworker, with ourselves, right? Because intimacy, we talk about intimacy, and then when you say the word in certain circles, especially the guys are like, "Ooh," start getting all giddy and stuff. And you're like, dude, no, intimacy before you can talk about intimacy with anybody else, you got to be able to have intimacy with yourself. And again, I don't mean that in an inappropriate way. It's just more like, do you have the emotional intelligence to be able to show up for yourself, for your own emotions, for your own thoughts? That's important. And so, when you ask this question, as far as like tell people about who you are and what you're about, I'm like, oh, that question. Usually, Eric, people do all the work for me and I just didn't have to kind of answer. In this case, you're like, hey, no, you tell us who you are, which is not a question that most of us get frequently. You tell me who you are. Most of us are like, this is who you are based on information that you either provided and you spent a lot of money to a copywriter or a marketing firm per word. And so they make this lengthy bio that's pretty much redundant as if they're trying to meet a word count, for a professor. But who am I? What am I about? I think I'm an individual that, despite all the things that I've managed to get into, and I know we'll probably touch on some of that, I think one of the biggest things that I am and I'm most proud of is I'm a cycle breaker. And I, grew up in a very difficult, challenging childhood. And yes, there were some positives, of course, but there were definitely some challenges and some things that could have easily derailed me and set me on a different trajectory in life. But, um, I have my father wasn't in my life. I was raised by a single mother, and as much as my mom did as best as she could with what she had, my mother was a hurt woman. And my mother, unfortunately, there were some things that, I was exposed to, some things, she exposed me to, some things that, she probably not intentionally, but some sort of behavioral traits and patterns and things that, I mean, there's a book, it's called Walking on Eggshells, and I read it years ago, and it's such an incredible book. And when I read it, I was just like, like that's because that's how I felt a lot of my youth. My mother would get triggered by these different things, whether they
Mm.
were related to me or not. And I'd come home from school and walk in the house, and I immediately knew, oh shit, she is not in the best mood. And I
Yeah.
immediately started to learn how to walk on eggshells. And then it became this thing of where it's my responsibility to make her happy. How do I make her laugh? That's one of the reasons I'm such a jokester. I think she was my audience. I mean, I was always working through material with her, whether I realized it or not. And, and so as a parent now of two, I diligently try to break that cycle
Yeah.
and to show up differently for my kids. But I'm also an individual, man, that is, you know, that just loves, I'm incredibly curious. I love people, even though there's a lot of people that have a lot of shit and a lot of baggage, and it's hard to love some people, but I love people. I love listening to people. I love hearing what people have been through, what they've learned, what they haven't learned. I just love conversation. And that gets me into these very long conversations at the grocery store when I only have 10 minutes, and somehow I'm there for 45 minutes and I haven't picked up anything. And my wife is calling me like, "Where are you?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I ran into this person. You'll never believe it." And blah, blah, blah. And she's like, "Dinner's ready." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll be there in a second." And then of course I show up 30 minutes later, right? Even though the store is 5 minutes away. But I love learning, and I've done a lot of learning. I still have a lot more learning to do. And I'd like to believe that you know, my buddy said this to me the other day. We were catching up. He was in the military, he was injured, and he actually stayed in the military, completed his 20 years, and then after that, went into social work and has become a therapist. And I mean, one of the coolest, most genuine, down to earth people I've ever known. Big heart. He's not a polished guy in the sense of where like you're gonna put him on TV. Like he's gonna go there like, hey, you better get your shit together. That's kind of how he gets down. And we were catching up the other day, and he said to me, he said, man, he's like, I like trauma, not drama. And I was like, I marinated on that. And I was like, man, that's so good. And I marinated on that. And the reason why is because I'm a person that when somebody's going through something, like I like to show up for you. But the minute that someone is like, it's drama, then you see a different side of me where I'm like, I don't want to hear this shit. I don't have time
Yeah.
for this. I don't have the energy for it. I won't listen. I'm not curious about that. I don't do drama. But if there's some trauma, hey, you know what? I'll roll up my sleeves. I'll lean in with you. But drama, nah, keep me out of it. Find someone else to roll with for that. So, I
Yeah.
mean, that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's one of those questions that I had to work through, honestly, to get to where I got to.
It's interesting. We have a lot in common. So my father was that same way. So you could come in and you would think things would be fine, and boom, you slam the refrigerator too loud
Yeah.
or something like that, and suddenly he's on you, and it made for a very anxious prone growing up because you never knew if dad was just going to flip out sometime.
Yeah.
And from 0 to 60 in, no time flat. And it was really sad because he was generous and kind and funny and incredibly intelligent, super curious about a lot of things. But then other times it was like living with an alcoholic, but there was no bottle to tell you, hey, stay away
Yeah.
from dad tonight. And I know exactly what that's like. And
Yeah.
it
It,
makes
it,
it hard to trust other people that when they
it
say that they have your back or that they love you, that they really do.
yeah, it is, it's, and not to, derail like sort of the direction you want this to go into, but I always find these podcasts are really fascinating because I tell people it's a free therapy session in some cases. And then it's also like, where it's not you're intending it to be, but it just kind of takes that path and that direction. And you just, again, the mood is set and you just kind of lean into it. But, my mom had been through a lot. And, my mom, forgive my mother. Not that I ever felt that I needed to forgive my mother. Um, I never felt that way. But my mom, I guess maybe the guilt when I became an adult, she would say, "Oh, you don't talk to me because that I did this." And I'm like, I've never even thought about that. Like
Yeah.
I actually maybe in some way either repressed that memory just as a defense mechanism to protect myself, or because I've just more focused on the other positive things, the great memories, that I just haven't really thought about it. But clearly you keep bringing it up. It must be something that weighs on you. And, one of those examples was my mother, said to me multiple times as an adult, she said, like, oh, you have this resentment towards me because I put my hands on you when you were a kid. Now, let me clarify. I'm not sure of your age. I'm 41 years old. Like you talk to anybody our age or older, and you talk about your parents putting their hands, and we're all going to immediately start a circle and start reminiscing and sharing stories. And we're going to do it with a smile on our face about, like, yeah, yeah, mom, your mom and my mom will whoop our ass if this, right? Like, it's just sort of, it was the culture. It was the culture. It was okay. Like where I grew up in the South, capital punishment was a thing. At school, my mother gave approval that if I acted out, instead of them having to call her, I would go to the principal's office, and with the wooden paddle, they would give me 3 licks and then send me back on my way. Like it was the way of the world. It was no big deal. However, my mother took it to a different gear, in the sense of where, I remember being a child, and like, man, 6, 7, 9, 12. And my mother would, and I'm going to use this word, beat me. And and it wasn't like the fun, like, oh, she got the belt or she got a switch. Yeah, she did that too. But it got to a point, and it evolved to a point where my mother would get a rope and she would literally tie my hands and my feet so I couldn't get away. And she would just stand over me and just hit me. And I would go to school with these like lacerations all over my body. And I was always protecting my face, because that was my money maker. And but I would go to school, and again, there was no conversation of from my mother of like, hey, when you go to school, make sure no one sees that's
Yeah.
those wounds on your body. No, I had to protect my mom. She was all I had. So I would change in a separate part of the locker room. I would make sure no one would see it. Like, I was always protecting my mother. And, and those are things that, I mean, easily, those are things for me to have resentment and anger towards her, but I never did. I always focused on how my mother was just this incredibly vibrant individual, big personality, big laughter. She's only 5 feet tall, but she could fill a room with her energy. That she focused, in a lot of cases, she would say to me, she was in an abusive relationship. Her mother gave her away. She was abused as a child. She lost a child when she was young. I mean, she's been through it. But culturally, as a Hispanic woman, like, you don't talk about these things. Like, you just don't deal with it. You just sort of, like, you have to bury it and press on. And so anything that would trigger her, she just, when she got into a mood of like, I'm going to discipline my son, everything just came out. It was just compounded. And I remember being around 12 years old one time, and she was standing over me and just hitting me. And I remember looking up at her and looking at her in her eyes and just thinking to myself, like, she's not even there. Like, I don't even see her there. Like, and thinking, this isn't even about me. What she's doing right now isn't even about what I did. What I did does not warrant this. Yeah, I was a kid. I was a boy. Like, I did stupid shit. Like, of course, but it doesn't warrant this. And one of the craziest things, after I was injured, there was that whole navigation and identity that I was starting to kind of create and figure out who I was and where I fit into society. And, all of the things. I mean, as a normal 19-year-old, you're navigating those waters, yet 19 years old with all of this, the scars, it just amplifies everything. And one day, after a couple of years, after I was injured, one day my best friend sat me down and he's like, "Man, you need to cry." And I was like, "I don't need to cry. I'm fine." He was like, "No, man, you need to cry." And we just started talking. I started crying. And believe it or not, man, a lot of the stuff, granted, yes, some of the stuff was about what happened to me and what I'm having to navigate in the world with scars on my body, but a lot of it was my youth, my childhood, and how that was still weighing on me. And I ended up leaning, and for me, it worked. And I went to therapy, traditional therapy. I found this incredible, I mean, I had to go a couple people and finally found this lady who was in her 70s, probably late 60s. And she like, oh my God, I tell my wife, I was like, yo, I would have married her in a heartbeat just because like I was like I just fell in love with her energy and the way she like and she introduced this concept about you need to set up boundaries with your mother.
Hmm.
And dude, when she said that, I was like, boundaries with my mom? Are you crazy? We're Hispanic. We don't do that. Like my mom's gonna like bring all the saints and pray for all the saints to come on me and like, no, you don't do that. And I realized that's what I needed to do because my mother would call me, and because of her own fears that she created narratives that were never true. And as far as like, oh, you're getting success, you're not proud of me, or you're not proud that I'm your mother. You find yourself in these certain circles. I'm not going to be good enough. Like I'm not educated enough. I'm like, I've never said those things. I've always elevated my mother. And, but I just continuously, this just became a pattern where it was just like draining me, draining me, draining me. And to the point where one day I said to my mom on the phone, I said, "Mom, I love you. Like, I love you. You are my queen. You are the reason I am where I am." I was like, and I will never waver from that. However, in order for me to really live the life that I deserve to live, and you deserve to live a life as well, like, I got to set up some boundaries. Like, I can't, when you call me and you want to marinate on things that happened 2 decades ago that had nothing to do with me, first of all, like, like I can't keep doing this. And and I remember my mother saying, "Fine, then I'll tell people I don't have a son," and hung up.
Wow.
And that was the last thing that, like, I mean, my mother and I haven't spoken, and she's still alive. We haven't spoken for 4 years now.
Wow.
Um, and, listen, yes, does it pain me? Yes, because that's my mom. That's the only parent I had. Like, I met my dad when I was in my late 30s, after he left when I was 9 months old. And that was an experience in itself. But it was just my mom and I for 18 years of my life before I joined the military. And so, of course, like I'm going to fill that void. But at the end of the day, I've always truly believed until my mother actually leaned into a lot of that pain, those wounds that existed. If until she does, she is not going to have peace until she leaves this earth. That's
Yeah.
just, and unfortunately, the hardest thing I've had to learn is that you can't save anybody and you can't force anybody to do anything that you believe that they need to do. And in reality, they know they need to do, but it's just too difficult to do because we spend so much of our energy just trying to control things and afraid and fear of what might happen. And what we don't think of is fear, this concept of like we're afraid of this thing happening, this negative thing, death or losing. But what people don't realize is like like that fear is equally keeping you from even living. Like it's
Yeah.
actually getting in the way of you living. And so the more it does that, the more you die. It's self-inflicted in that point and in its own way. And so my mother, and I'll just tell this quick story, but my mother, I remember I was around 6 years old and my mother was in this abusive relationship, and it was like a pattern with this guy for, a couple years easily, where, any given weekend he'd have a few too many Budweisers, and that's just what he drank. I'm not, no knock on Anheuser-Busch. I'm just saying, like, it could have been a Michelob Ultra. I don't know, whatever. But the point is, that's what he would drink, and he would have a few too many, something would cue him, and he'd put his hands on my mom. And I would call the cops. They'd come and get him, take him away. A few days later, he's back at the house, and things would look good. And then all of a sudden it wouldn't. It's just a cycle. And one day, my mother and I are out and she's smiling, man. She's got this big, beautiful, vibrant smile. And I'm looking at her like this curious kid. And I'm like, and I finally asked her, I was like, why are you smiling? Because I know what happened. Why are you smiling? And she's like, I smile to invite the blessings. If I sit here and just fixate on that event that happened, I'm not going to be able to receive and see the beautifulness that's coming our way. Of course, as a kid, that didn't make any sense to me. And as I got older and I started to experience my own adversity, I was like, ah, man, that makes so much sense. And that's such a beautiful way to look at it. However, given what I've told you and shared about my mother, that is a survival mechanism in the way that she was viewing it and the way that she was utilizing it. The way she was utilizing it was simply like, I need to look and find for something, as if you're being carried down some river and you can't swim, and the current's too strong, and you're just reaching for branches and see if something you can just hold on to long enough. She was just literally just reaching. The problem was is that she wasn't, when she held on to something and found something, she wasn't able really to then lean into like the blessings that really did exist in her life.
Yeah.
Because then she was just worried about the fear of then losing, or the next thing happening, that branch breaking, and now she'd be back into survival mode, instead of her really leaning into like, oh my God, thank God I'm here, and I got this. And that's been something that indirectly she's taught me. Whereas I've gone through my own adversity, yes, there was a period where I had just had to be a survivalist and just try to survive and make it through the day. But it got to a point where I'm like, okay, that's not sustainable. And that's not going to lead to true happiness. Like, and I have to then, when I find these moments of where I'm able to come up for air, I have to then pay attention to the very thing that got me into that freaking water in the first place. I gotta train myself to learn how to swim. Like, I gotta train myself to do all these things. So hopefully I'm not in that space. And if I am in that space again, I don't react or respond the same way I just did.
Yeah.
And someone asked me a question the other day. He said, does life get easier or harder? I said, oh man, and I said, we can't predict the future. We don't know what the future. I mean, all of us have a definition of what hard is. It's different for all of us. I said, but I could tell you, the more that you're leaning in, the more that you're doing the work, the more that you're just, in some cases, being like the Forrest Gump and just kind of just going through the motions, and just kind of experiencing the journey and picking up things as you go, versus being so fixated and focused that you have tunnel vision and you're not able to see what's literally in front of you. Not even like what's on your peripheral, what's right in front of you. I was like, but if you're able to do that and continuously lean in and do a lot of the work and sit in silence and reflect and have gratitude and pause, do those things, then I believe life gets easier, because you are able to show up differently. You don't get rocked as easily as you once used to.
Yeah. For me, I see it as life doesn't get any easier. You just get better and stronger.
Yep.
And that's really it,
Yep.
is that over time, if you choose to do so, that you become stronger, so that what was once hard, what would have been nearly impossible for me 10 years ago is very doable now.
Yeah.
And so that you can, you just, but that's like you said, you have to lean into that. You have to be willing to accept that, and you have to have the right perspective on it. And so for me, I'm at a position, like we were discussing at the very beginning of the podcast, where, I mean, this guy basically took 5,500 euros from me. That's almost $6,000. And most people be, you know, furious about that. And everybody's like, did it make you mad? I'm like, I was frustrated and I was disappointed. I was frustrated because I didn't get the apartment. I was disappointed because I didn't get the apartment, but I was also just disappointed in him, because he
Yeah.
was a pretty nice guy. And I thought this was a good thing.
Yeah.
And to have that happen, I was that was the main thing. I was just frustrated that I didn't have the place that I wanted. And it was like, okay, and disappointed in this other person. And other than that, I just let it go. And people are like, well, how? And I'm like, well, I just recognized that me getting mad about it would be me deciding to be in a bad mood about something that I can't change, that I have no control over. So I would put myself in a bad mood for a few days. For what?
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing I can do. So me being in a bad mood would be my choice. So why would I put myself in a bad mood on purpose? And they're
Yeah.
kind of, oh, I never really thought of it that way. I'm like, because there's nothing I could do. There's absolutely nothing in this situation I could do. It's out of my
No.
control.
The only thing you do is, in some cases there's, processes and that are in place and that hopefully that you can maybe regain that or partial or maybe you won't. But
Yeah.
that's all you can do is like just do your due diligence to go through that process. But you're right, man. And I think that's the thing is that, at 19 years old when I was injured, um,
So before we go a little bit further, go ahead and talk about that with my audience so that they know where you're coming from. So I mean, I've read your bio, so I know, but kind of explain
yeah.
when you talk about your injury.
So I joined the military. I joined the army after high school, and I joined as an 11 Bravo, an infantryman. And 6 months later, I literally was on a plane going to war. This is in 2003, so before the conflict in Iraq began, and less than a month, by a few days into my deployment, I was driving a Humvee through a city called Karbala when the front left tire of the Humvee that I was driving ran over a roadside bomb. And there were three other troops in the vehicle with me. They were all thrown out of the vehicle and they all walked away with minor physical injuries, but I was trapped inside. And I was trapped inside for about 5 minutes. And listen, I was conscious. I was in and out of consciousness. I mean, but I remember a lot of the detail of what I saw, what I felt, what I kept thinking, what I kept saying to myself. I remember all of those things, and I can get into a lot of that detail here if you choose. But the thing that I feel like I have graduated from the the details, if you will, like of those 5 minutes that almost was attempting to take my life. Graduated from just focusing on a lot of the pain and seeing my body change to, huh, there's something else that I should be focusing on. And what that is that in the mix of those 5 minutes, so yes, I had sustained burns to, over my body, a little over 30%, third degree burns on my face, on my head, hands, arms, part of my legs, part of my back. But obviously it's on my face, it's on my head, it's very visible. There's no way to hide it. Um, and so I could see my hands changing. Like, I mean, I don't need to get more graphic than that. Like, I think people understand what I mean. But the thing that, as much as I sustained the physical burns, the thing that the time that was threatening whether I was going to make it or not was the fact that I had a broken rib.
Hmm.
I had lacerated liver. I couldn't. It was hard for me to get oxygen. So in the mix of me trying to like gas for air, not realizing it, I was inhaling the smoke from the fire, which was obviously doing more damage than the actual burns to the exterior of my body.
Hmm.
Um, and I could tell you that over the course of those 5 minutes, there were several instances where my eyes got heavy and as if when all of us are watching TV late at night and we're fighting there, we want to get to the good part. We want to be able to make it. And you're like, oh, I'm hanging on, I'm hanging on. Boom, your eyes are closed. And my eyes would close and then when my eyes would close, I would feel nothing.
Hmm.
I felt no pain. I didn't hear any of the chaos of people yelling outside the Humvee, trying to, one, do a head count, find everybody, but then two, figure out how to get to me. None of it was present. Literally, it was in the mix of my eyes being closed. It was just simply the thing that I connected with that I could hear was my breath, and that I could hear. I would I would have these thoughts and I could remember the vivid conversation of just saying to myself, like, I'm gonna lose my life. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die in this way at this age. Like my mom's worst fears becoming a reality. Remember having those thoughts and those conversations with myself. But then I also remember telling myself, you can't keep your eyes closed because if you keep your eyes closed, you're giving up. and I would open my eyes and I would continue to scream and yell for someone to please pull me out. And I did this at least 3, 4 times over those 5 minutes. And so for probably a decade, when people ask me what happened, I would just talk about, what I saw in my hands and what I felt. And, which again, not dismissing it, it's all part of it. But there came a point in my life when I started to really understand breath work and really understand the true importance of being able to pause and reflect. That I then, when I looked at that 5 minutes, I realized, it's so fascinating that when my eyes were open and I was aware of what was happening, man, I felt excruciating pain. Like I felt like I couldn't breathe. Like I just felt life was being sucked out of me. But yet the moment that I closed my eyes, like I felt no pain, I heard no chaos, and I just connected with my breath. And that breath, to me, I practice that till this day, is that when life feels overwhelming, like there's a freaking bomb that just went off in my life, and people are needing a lot for me, and energy and all this stuff is being extracted from me. um any point when I feel things are overwhelming, I just close my eyes. I just literally close my eyes and I connect with my breath, and I just breathe, and then I just tell myself that breath reminds me and allows me to understand that I'm alive, that I'm okay, that I can get through this. And it doesn't have to be long. And I open my eyes and I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's lean in. And so, i- i- you know, that's what happened to me. I was evacuated, ended up in San Antonio, Texas, which is where the burn center is for the military. And I spent almost 3 years there in the hospital recovering. Again, I was 19 when it happened. So I turned 20, 21, 22 in the hospital. And talk about, identity. I mean, I was left with looking at this individual in the mirror and not having a clue who that person was.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had lost my identity, my appearance for 19 years of my life, when I looked in the mirror, I knew that person. Now I'm looking, and I'm like, I have no idea who that person is. Also, the
Mm-hmm.
identity of being in the military. I was like, I love this idea of being a soldier, and I wanted to do 20 years, and I wanted to go to every school and program I could to be this highly decorated soldier at the end of my career. And now you're telling me I can't stay in the army. And so my identities were essentially stripped away, and I was just this clean vessel that was just in the world to be remolded in a sense, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and it was tough, man. I mean, it was challenging. I mean, as anybody can imagine. I mean, just to be able to navigate that in itself. I mean, I told a friend of mine the other day, I was like, the person that I created, the persona that I created, like the personality I created, the mindset, all of the things that I created was what I needed to create in order to survive that period of my life. I needed to
Mm-hmm.
become this person that said, when people stared at me and I knew it bothered me, instead of leaning into the fact that it bothers me, I would be like, I don't give a shit about those people anyways. Like that was sort of the who I had to create myself to be, to where I wouldn't allow those things to harm me and to hurt me. And it served its purpose at that period of my life. But then when it came time for me to graduate to a next phase of my life, in a sense of my relationship with my wife and relationship with other people that came into before I had kids, I realized that image, that persona, that person no longer needed to be. Like I needed to let that person help me get to this point. But if I continued with that image, I would never allow myself to be vulnerable. I would never allow myself to trust. I would never allow myself to really have, true connection with these individuals who I've learned keep deeply care about me. And so I've had to let go of that person, and then sort of again approach life as like this baby that can be remolded, and just lean into this new experience and this new journey that I'm on, which has led to some incredible blessings. And so it's been a journey, man. I mean, it's been 21 years since that day. And for a long time, I also referred to that day as a traumatic day, as And now I look at it as a blessing. I do. I truly do. Like, I mean, I believe that somebody said something to me recently, and they said that your environment can change your DNA. And I remember when this person said that, I was like, ah, and
Yeah, the genetics.
yeah, and then the conversation ended, and I just kept marinating on that, and I was just like, huh, and just really trying to, and I was like, okay, I can, okay, because then I was like, well, so when I was a kid, that man that my mother was seeing, he would play the piano and he would sing Spanish love songs in our living room.
Hmm.
And I would go and sit next to him and like sing these songs with him because Spanish was my first language. And he would take me every now and then to this hole in the wall bar down the street from our house, our apartment. And I would sing a couple songs, Spanish love songs, sing and dance and like in front of all these people that are heavily intoxicated and and I was doing my thing, man. And when I think about, I'm like, you know what? I I was born, my DNA was that's who I am. I was always this positive, uplifting, like just fun energy to be around, curious, liked people. Like I was always that person. But then there were all this set of things that were taking place over the course of my life and my youth in the environment that was starting to maybe kind of change my DNA and
Hmm.
lead me down a different path. And then you throw this injury into it, that also can then change my DNA and set me on a different path. And all it took for me to get back to who JR was always destined and meant to be was one person, and then two people, and then five people leaning in and showing up for me as human beings
So
and
what's this?
create.
Was the persona after you were injured more angry? Was it somebody
Oh,
that?
I was 100% angry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was 100% angry. And a lot of that anger stemmed from, it's like people had these biases when they would sit down and have a conversation with me. Uh, You
Hmm.
know, they would look at me and they'd say, "You're a wounded veteran." Um, and that's all they saw. And I'm like, yeah, I know that's all you see. But if you listen to me, you would identify that there's so much more to me. There's interest I have. There are uh, personality, traits that you're probably like, oh man, I could get with, I can get behind that. This person's cool. This person's funny. This person likes sports. This person doesn't like this, does like that. Oh, I can connect with that individual. And the more I would try to explain myself and allow people to understand who I was, what I kept running into was people still fixated on the fact that I was a wounded veteran.
Hmm.
That's where the wall was, and they would just stop there. And then there were a lot of people that kept telling me they were gonna, because at this point I'd identified that I wanted to be a speaker, like I enjoyed this work, I wanted to continue to do it on a bigger scale. And people were like, "Yeah, we'll help you. We'll help you." And then those people wouldn't help you. And then I'd get mad because I'm like, "Well, you said you were going to help me." And they would always, I remember one person vividly saying to me, "Well, I got other projects to work on." And I said, "Yeah, but you told me you were going to do this by this time. Like it's not like I'm coming at you out of the blue. Like you told me this." And so the more that I just kept getting disappointed and disappointed and disappointed and disappointed, it just made me angry. And I just felt like no one cared. Um, I mean, honestly, no one gave a shit. That's the way I felt. And w- it turned into one day my best friend, telling me that I needed to cry, and I started to cry and, had this real heart to heart conversation. And what I realized is that I too played a role in that, in turning people off because I was mad, because I was angry, because I, you know, I was the one that the way I was approaching people, the way I was speaking to people. I mean, listen, I have a gift to be able to get in front of anybody, any group of number of people, and to be able to speak and to make people feel something. Like I have that gift. I know. But that gift is equally can be a curse if I'm not in the best space. And trust me, like there were times when if Eric crossed me the wrong way and Eric disappointed me, I would come at you, Eric, with my words, with the same words that I could lift you up, or the same words I'm literally going to paralyze you. And once I identified that I too played a role in the way that people responded to me, I started to change. And it wasn't like I was being fake. I just understood, like, okay, I needed, it's not people's fault that, they don't understand me. It's not people's fault that they don't understand what I'm going through. Like everybody has their own journeys. Like I'm not going to understand what a lot of other people go through in their lives because I haven't been exposed to that.
Yeah.
Is that my fault? No, it just means that we all have different. And so I took the approach of I need to be an educator. I need to be an educator. I need to be the one that is teaching people not only who I am, but who all of us are, meaning the people that I represent at that time, which was mostly service members, wounded
Mm.
servicemen, who we are. We're not just these individuals in uniform. We're not just these individuals with scars. We are individuals that are navigating a lot of the same things that everybody else is navigating in the world. It's just maybe a little compounded a little bit more just because of the fact that we are in a military environment. We are in a time of conflict. Yes, there's different, but at the end of the day, we're still people navigating the same thing that other people are navigating. And once I understood how to then connect with people that I was in the driver's seat, all of a sudden, man, I started literally finding community. I started building community. I started trying to be a little bit more vulnerable. And the more that I would be a little bit more vulnerable about this little thing, I'm not going to give you too much, but this little thing, then I found people came up to me and said, man, I can relate to you. I can connect with you. And people started to support me. And I was like, oh, and all that was data. Again, data that I was gathering that said, this works. This is positive if you continue to do this. This is what people like from your brand, JR. And the more that I kept doing it, the more that I was just like, okay, I'm building to the point where, I found myself on stages, and I found myself in the entertainment industry, the big show that I was on was Dancing with the Stars. And, people say, how did you go on that show? And how were you nervous? And I was like, I was never nervous, but
Well, you
now it
move.
makes sense.
I
What's
mean, you
that?
move well. I watched some of the videos and you can move, man.
But that, that's who I was always meant to be.
Yeah.
From that kid that was dancing in that bar, I was always meant to be this person that was comfortable, being on that stage. I was always meant to be that. So when the opportunity presented itself, it was like, all right, like I'm in my element. This is who I am. And listen,
Yeah.
man, I used to, when you're raised by a single woman, you have no other choice but to be her dance partner, whether you want to be or not. And so, you learn at an early age how to get down. And then, my mom, also taught me how to dance when I realized that girls like guys that can dance. So I was like, hey, why don't you show me some extra moves, mom? But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a journey. I mean, it's sometimes I stop and I really reflect and marinate on, wait, was that my life? Was that me? It's one of those things that you just can't really, I mean, you could write this stuff up in a script and a movie and some show and something. I mean, but I mean, the fact that I'm living it and the fact that, yeah, it's pretty wild.
So, question for you. Do you
Mhm.
think that you could have become the person you are now, meaning, becoming that person that you want to be? Do you think that the person you were before your accident and the things that happened with that, do you think that he could have reached that without the accident?
So instinctively, I want to say no. I believe we all have to, as much as it sucks that we have to go through the hardship. I believe that the hardship, that's that's where it's at, right?
Yeah.
That's where the opportunity lies to grow, to evolve. Um, I'd like to believe, had I not been injured, that I would have gotten to this point. I think the difference is it would have taken a lot longer.
Yeah.
It would have taken a hell of a lot longer because when you go through something like this, And no matter what it is that you go through, when you go through something it's pretty life changing, it almost amplifies it accelerates the trajectory and the journey that you're on, and it just puts you in a space where you're like you have to then learn how to pay attention to all these things, and it just starts you on. And once you get a little taste of it, I mean, it's like anything in life, right? It's like, not that I'm encouraging people to lean into other bad habits or whatever, but I
And
mean
go find
it's
misery.
yeah, I like, but it's like it has the same effect in a sense of where once you start leaning in a little bit and get that gratification and get that reward, you're like, it's just kind of addicting. I think I want to continue to do this. I think I want to continue to lean into this. I think I want to explore more avenues of this or that. And all of a sudden you're like, and so it just accelerated my curiosity and accelerated my journey to figure out what did I needed to work on, and to really lean into the feelings that I was feeling every time something would happen. Like I would get this feeling in my chest, or this pit in my stomach, or my in my throat, and I realize, oh, there's a lot of trauma that needs to be addressed. And so I think it just accelerated it. But I mean, I also equally could have been an individual in the military, and I'm not saying all individuals in the military are like this, but I mean, because there was distraction, because I would have been busy with my career and busy with whatever, like it could have easily just I just could have been a distracted individual, still potentially, yeah, potentially, yeah. I mean, when I think about it, I definitely feel like I could have. I don't know how the hell to say this. I don't even know what I'm trying to say, to be honest. But I think you get the point. I think your listeners understand what I'm trying to say. Is that I just, because we're so conditioned that when we go through things, we just need to look for distraction, and in some cases, that's okay, and I
Yeah.
get that. However, like I just think I just would have been distracted, and I just would have been repeating the same cycle over and over and over. Maybe not to the degree of what I was exposed to as a child, but I think I still would have been angry. I think I think there still would have been things that would have triggered me, that would have, just set me off. I think, yeah. I mean, it would have taken me a lot longer to learn this lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of think back on my life, and I definitely had plenty of struggles with things. But I think I always had a concerted effort of I wanted to figure out how to be happy. And I
Yeah.
wasn't when I was younger because, a lot of trauma growing up. So it took me a long time to figure out those things, but a lot of it was just I had to find the right resources to be able to do that. And so there are times when I go, why did it take me until I was in my 40s to find Stoicism? Because this is, even though I had philosophy when I was in college, but I think that like you, I'm a very curious person. And so I was always trying like, to find things to grow and to learn and to, I believe in the kind of the potential of the human mind because I love learning. And when I moved out here to Amsterdam, gave away and sold, pretty much most of my books. And I would say I probably had about 300 or 400 books in my library. Um, and I would say probably about 80% of them were like psychology, habits, things along those lines, just all interesting like that. Then the other batch was all sci. Well, I guess it probably about 60%. Then the other was like sci-fi and, then instructional books like how to play guitar and things like that. But I kind of wonder, like, why, in some ways, I feel like it took me a long time to get to that place where I was happy, but I was always getting happier.
Yeah.
And I wonder, but yeah, so it's always an interesting thing for me when I talk with people about that and they have one kind of focal, pivotal event that really changed the whole direction of their life and recognizing that that was the thing that turned them into who they are and they became the person that they're happy with, and
Yeah.
that otherwise if they hadn't had that tragedy, that hard thing that really knocked them down, they probably would have just meandered along and not been of anybody of consequence.
It's almost, when you were mentioning all those books that you had, I'm sitting there looking at my office, and I'm right in front of me. I'm like, oh my God, I have all these books. And it's it's almost like, you know, you read books to gain knowledge, right? And people say knowledge is power. And I'm like, okay, to me, you know, if you're just gathering knowledge and doing nothing with it, it's just knowledge, right?
Yeah.
It's just it's cocktail talk.
Yeah.
But when you apply knowledge applied,
You go
that to
with
me is power, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Wisdom is power. That's the way I look
right.
at it.
And so to your point, like, you clearly were curious about all of this well before a lot of the events that happen in your life. But I think you need the life events in order for this stuff to be like, like,
Yeah.
because then you're
You can
then it
actually
just it
apply them.
yeah, then it's just like knowledge. Now it's just like, okay, this is cool. Like if this happened, but it doesn't apply to your life in that moment. So you're just kind of like, okay, cool, it's just knowledge. But then life happens, and then it's like, oh, here's your opportunity to then take that knowledge and apply it. And now but if you never had that event, you would never know how it applies to you. And it's
Yeah.
no different than, like, I mean, I think that's I think that's a misconception with it, and that you need to go through what you need to go through, and um, in order for you to be able to understand. It's like I tell people all the time, like when I have the opportunity to speak, and I share at the end. I'm like, listen, all of us in this space, no matter how many people are in the audience, all of us are in different places in our lives, professionally, personally. Some of us are going to be in spaces in our lives where what I've shared over the last 45-ish minutes, man, it's just striking a chord with you. It's boom, it's home, it's what you need in this moment. Others, business is booming, as Antonio Brown, the former Pittsburgh Steelers said, like everything is going well, personally, professionally, everything is fantastic. And that's great. That's amazing. I'm happy for you.
Appreciate
I'm
it.
not wishing the negative. I'm not hoping that something horrible, tragic happens to you or people you love. Um, but what I encourage people to do is that in the midst of you, as you go through life, you have to look at it as if when you're walking down the street and you see a penny on the sidewalk. And most of us won't pick up that penny because we're like, one, some of us are germaphobes, or we're like, where's that penny been? That penny's dirty. But then the other of us are going to be like, we're like, well, that penny's on tails. You don't pick it up because that's bad luck. And then there's the other of us that are just going to be like, well, I got money in my pocket. I don't need that penny. And my approach to life is this: every conversation that I have, every experience that I have, good or bad, major, minor, or whatever, I view it as if there's that penny and I'm picking it up, even if I feel like it's not relevant to me, even if I feel like I don't necessarily need it, I still pick it up right now. Because the more pennies, the more change I pick up along the way, eventually you want to be able to have a pocket full of change that you can pay when everyone's stuck on one road and you look over to the left and you're like, man, why is that road vacant? And I'm like, well, that's a toll road. You got to have X amount of change to be able to access that road and get to where you want to go a lot quicker. Boom, I picked up all these pennies along the way.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm always the knowledge that I'm accruing is to hopefully prepare me for the cycle of life and the next thing that's going to present itself. And it doesn't mean the next thing has to be this traumatic event on the same scale of what happened to me at 19. It just traumatic event can simply be like, oh my God, I'm not getting as many engagements as I'm accustomed to, or like it just means in the moment it's traumatic for me, it's a big thing for me, but doesn't mean it has to be life altering. It doesn't mean that it has to be like you lose somebody you love dearly. It doesn't have to be that. But then I'm able then to apply this knowledge to that situation. And I believe that that's what allows. I mean, man, I mean, listen, everybody's life was turned upside down during at the beginning of COVID, right? In 2020. And I remember, obviously me as a speaker and traveling all over the world, and that was not happening. And, people in my circle were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Like, this is everybody's real life scenarios. What are we going to do? And my wife was like that too. And I was just like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Like, I'm not going to sweat it. It's going to be all right. And I started to then ask my team of like, hey, is virtuals a thing? Like, is that something we could do? Like, can we lean in? Oh, no one's done that. No one's doing that. And I'm like, oh, well, let's figure this out. And so I would like test, my computer and my camera and my mic and my lighting and my Wi-Fi. And I was testing all these things. And then one day out of the blue, somebody on my team says, hey, somebody's asking if you're comfortable doing like a keynote virtually. And I was like, let's lean into it. Let's see. Let's go. And that first one, dude, and for the next like 2 years of my life, I was the busiest I'd ever been, all from the
Mm.
comfort of my home. Right. It was the joke of we're professional up top, right? And God knows what down below, right? Like, I mean, it was just like I was in my office knocking out 3, 4 keynotes in a day and making great money. And it was just like, but I never panicked. I never stressed because life has conditioned me that, okay, when adversity presents itself, when everyone else is trying to be chaotic and like worried about how level headed are you going to be, how calm are you going to be, how present are you going to be to what's happening. And I got to share something, man, because y- you know I don't know if anything that I've shared in this episode has connected or it resonated with any of your listeners. We won't know until it comes out and people start to share with you, or people feel inclined to share something with me. Um, and that's the beauty of life. You just gotta like show up, speak from your heart, speak authentically, function authentically, and not be focused on the outcome of like, I hope X amount of people reach out to me and say that this changed their lives. I mean, I'm putting myself out there with the hopes that it'll help somebody no matter what stage of life that they're in. And I think these are all timeless conversations, right? Like, I mean, I went back when you and I got connected, I went back and listened to episodes from a while ago. And so I could find a year from now someone saying, "Man, I heard you on that podcast. Like that was cool, like or whatever." But the thing is that I am viewed as this individual that has all this knowledge, and bring him in to help us. And yes, I've accrued a lot of knowledge and wisdom, if you will, and I do love sharing. But I'm also a human being that puts myself out into the world because I know the world can equally give me the things that I need as a human being. And what I mean, and I'll tell you this quick story. So a few years ago, I did this engagement for for Delta Airlines. And it was in Atlanta, and it was going to be 2 dates, and it was going to be on a Tuesday and then on a Thursday. And so I just knocked out two. I mean, I'm a Delta snob, so this was kind of like a cool thing for me to go to the headquarters and speak to the company. And the culture was incredible. Like, I mean, just from the bottom up, like the culture was incredible. It just wasn't like that flight attendant, like, welcome on board. Like, no, it was like everybody was like that. And within the company that I was encountering. And so I was on a high when I flew back home. And then all of a sudden, something, I don't know what it was, man. I can't even remember. Something just triggered me on the plane and just put me in like in this funky space. And I remember landing, and every time I land, I always text my wife and just say, "Hey, I landed. No matter where I am, just landed, headed to the airport. Hey, headed home, whatever." Or headed to the hotel, headed home, whatever. And I didn't text her. I was like, I just need some time to myself. So I get in my car and I am exiting the parking garage, and I pull up to the booth. I don't even look at the person. I just put my hand out the window with a ticket. And the person, I can feel that somebody grabs a ticket, but they're not taking it. So naturally, like I look up and I see this older lady, and we're both holding this ticket as we're making eye contact. And she asked me, she says, what happened to you? And I said, "Oh, I was in a car accident." Just simple. And she says, were you burned? And I said, "Yeah." She says, "Were you in the military?" Said, "Yes." And she says, "Was most of your body injured?" I said, "Yes." And then she said, "Can I pray for you?" And I was like, yeah, sure. And, she quietly just closed her eyes and she was praying. And then I look up and she's writing, and I'm like, all right, now she's doing the transaction. Now I'm going to give her my credit card. We're going to pay. We're going to move this thing along. Well, she hands a ticket back to me. And as she hands it back to me, she says, Are you familiar with Buddhism? And I said, not really. And she says, well, within Buddhism, there is a Buddhist we call Amitabha. And she said, Amitabha represents infinite light, infinite wisdom. When I see you, I see Amitabha. And she gives this beautiful explanation. And she hands me the ticket and she wrote it on the ticket, Amitabha. And then I went and she was like, here's your total. And I gave her my credit card, paid. And I was like, thank you so much. And she was like, have a great day. And, sort of the metaphor for life, right? Like that arm in a parking garage is down. And once I paid, it lifts and allows me to go through. It's sort of that metaphor for life. And I had to pay my dues before I can actually move on to the next phase of my life. And I remember calling my wife immediately and I was like, babe, Amitoba. And she was like, what? And I was like, I'll tell you when I get home. And I just literally for the next 30 minutes driving home, put the windows down, and I just was like present and just really still engage in that conversation and what this lady shared with me. I haven't seen that lady at that airport since then, and I travel all the time, but I'm not supposed to see her again. This is a lady I've asked, and they said, yeah, she doesn't work here anymore. That's all they said, right? And I was like, okay. But here's a lady that I don't know what her life was about. I don't know what experiences she's had. I don't know who she is. I don't know anything about her. All I know is that she was a person working the booth in the parking garage, which many of us in society would probably look down on her because we're like, what's that lady? She just works in a parking garage. Like, what is she going to She has nothing to share. She has nothing to offer, like nothing. And yet that lady is the one that shifted my perspective. The guy that gets invited to do all these grand things, she helped me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the beauty in life is that, but I want people to understand something over the course of that I mean, it seems like it might have been a 10-minute conversation. It wasn't. It was probably like 3 minutes max. But when she asked me, was I injured? I could have said none of your business. When she said, were you burned? I could have said none of your business. When she said, were you in the military? Where is it most of your body? Can I pray for you? Absolutely not. Are you familiar with Buddhism? No, and I don't care. I could have shut it down so many times over the course of that interaction. Yet life has taught me that in those moments is when you have to be more open, you have to be more present, more engaged, because there's something, a penny or two, that is going to be dropped here. And it's up to you how you actually want to receive that and what you actually receive. And so I believe I'm just a makeup of all the people that I've interacted with over the last 21 years of my life. Like even this conversation with you, I'm just a product of this. That's that's what I am. Like I'm not self-made. Like like I am made through my interactions, my connections with real people, going through real things in life.
So, speaking of that, do you have a particular framework or belief system that you adhere to, like Buddhism or Stoicism or some type of philosophy, or have you just kind of cobbled it along as you've been going along?
Man, I think there's not one particular thing that I like. I believe, whether it's stoicism, whether it's like any sort of religion, or whether it's any other philosopher or their approaches. Like I think for me, I love creating sort of like this a la carte component of it, where there's
Yeah.
a lot of beautiful things about this and the beautiful things about that, and I just kind of like open to all of it, and see how that resonates with me. I think, Buddhism is something that I've wanted to lean in a little bit more into, just because it feels like there's like a lot of alignment. Um, like I mentioned earlier, when I do a lot of yoga, they're always talking to, making a lot of references, and I feel like a lot of that stuff resonates with me, but I think that's true for a lot of things. I think there's I've heard you talk about in previous episodes, and talk about, stoicism and I'm like, oh, I vibe with that. Like that makes
Yeah.
I'd get that tattooed on my body right now. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's not so much like like I feel like I'm in a space where I could essentially pull from a lot of different things and it works for me right now. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way, but Stoicism has kind of been my core. But I like branching out and finding lots of other things and pulling them in, whether that's from like understanding neuroscience, whether that's some aspect of Buddhism that I find interesting, whether that's, um, almost anything. But I found that Stoicism is just speaks to how my mind works because I'm very rational.
Yeah.
And that rationality just really, really just clicks for me because it allows me to kind of logic through, why am I feeling this way? Why did I react that way? What's going on? What can I do to make sure that when this thing happens, that I handle it in the way that I want to? And it's just
Yeah.
all tools that are fantastic, but it doesn't have a lot of the baggage that most religions have because there's no rules. It's just
Right.
principles and tools.
Yeah.
For me, that's kind of why I cling on to it. And I kind of joke around that in many ways, it's like the Greco-Roman Buddhism because how you can say something in Stoicism, you can find almost the exact corollary within Buddhism. Um, so for me, that's really interesting. And I also really enjoy like physics and stuff like that, quantum mechanics, understanding those type of things, how that interrelates with the ideas of consciousness and reality. And so, you know, it's
All
this
that
kind
stuff
of,
intertwined.
yeah,
Yeah, there's all that stuff is intertwined. There's a lot of intersectionality between it all. I mean, in a lot of ways, like you said, a lot of us are saying the same things. We believe in a lot of ways the same things. It's just in some cases, like you said, like the rules is what changes things. That and so yeah. So I love this concept of just being this being that is existing and being present to, because here's the thing, like if and again, no knock on anybody if they are more exclusive to one or another or whatever, that's fine. It works for you. But for me, my viewpoint is, well, if I'm so gun ho on this one thing, when I have an interaction with somebody that introduces something else to me that could be beneficial to me, doesn't mean I have to completely like be embedded and get embedded with it, but it means that there's something that I can gain from that's going to help me in this space of my life. You're closing yourself off from that.
yeah.
And and
I can
yeah,
I can
so
certainly relate to that because I grew up Mormon and that's very much very strict and this is how things are. These are the rules and you follow them. And I joke around with my Catholic friends that I gave it up for Lent. Um, and but yeah, I just found that as I got older, I reached a point where when I did a little more digging into the history of the church and realized, what Joseph Smith was about, what Brigham Young was about, I'm like, okay, these guys were con men, and they were not very good people. And
yeah,
this whole thing was just made up to take money from people. And
yep,
while there were some core Christian principles, which I think were very good, and a lot of early Christianity was actually based on Stoic philosophy. A lot of the early Christian thinkers were Stoics and or had, studied Stoicism, and then they, were joined the Christianity at that point and were very influential in that reign. And if you look at the Christian church, it was very different than what we have now. But so a lot of the principles I think were good, but all of the rules and all of the rituals and everything on top of that, and just this whole very repressive culture and lifestyle, I just found it, suffocating. And once I
yeah,
left, it was just like it was freeing. I remember
yeah.
once I made the decision to leave, it was like I had shrugged off a giant backpack full of like 1,000 pounds and just like, and I physically felt lighter. I had to look around the room like, am I actually lifting off the floor? What? This feels so weird. It was a literal feeling like, and I was like, that was weird. just a
Yeah.
decision in my mind that, okay, I can let go of this because this is all a bunch of bullshit. I've tried my
Yeah.
best for, I think it was at that point, 30 years, 32 years. And it just doesn't work for me. And it's the reason why it doesn't work is it's not true.
Yeah.
Let it go. And it was like, oh, I felt free. And
Yeah.
then I kind of wandered around and, did a lot more exploring, kind of did all the stuff that I should have done in college. Um, and figured out much more who I was. And then, like I said, about 8 years ago, found Stoicism, and it was just like, I just keep having these light bulb moments of like, oh, if I understand what I can control and what I can't, and let go of those that I can't, God, that makes life a lot easier. And I stopped getting
Yeah.
stressed, and angry about the things that I can't control because, well, I can't control them. So
You can't control.
I can face reality and just be like, yeah, I can't control that. So, okay.
So, what would you say to someone like myself who, isn't really that familiar with stoicism? Like, where does one begin? Like, I'm in a stage of my life right now where I'm like, I want to. I got all these books. I got all these different sources that I can gain a lot of knowledge and just really connect with different things. Um, like I that's the space. Like I was in a space of my life, so just to bore you a little bit, but like my daughter is 12, and for the past couple of years, she's been playing. She plays softball. She plays select travel club, whatever people call it, wherever they're from, and I got asked to coach, and then it just turned into like I was the head coach, and I just and when you cross into this level of sports, it's a completely different beast that consumes your entire life. And I'm also the personality that no matter what I get into it. Like whatever I'm doing, I'm gonna do. And so I had leaned in heavily into this, and still, I mean, I had another kid, and so my son's 3. And there was just and then work, and I went to school, went to college when I was in my mid 30s, and so I just graduated a year. Like, so I just had all this stuff, and I just didn't have time or energy. And so now I'm in a space in my life where I'm not coaching anymore. My kids are pretty much on autopilot, if you will, like you kind of have routines in place. And so I'm like, you know what? I got some time where I just want to read, and I want to listen to people talk, and I want to, write, and I just want to just be present with it, whatever it is. And so if I wanted to learn more, and if I wanted to, what's a good starting point for someone like myself to learn more about sort of the basics, the principles of Stoicism? And I'm going to write it down as you're talking.
Well, I happen to know there's this really great podcast called The Stoic Break.
Which, by the way, I don't know if you picked up on it, that when I logged in, I was like, you know what? This podcast speaks to me because one is talking about stoicism, which I'm familiar with, but it also is coffee, and I love coffee. And so I had to make myself a little coffee. So I've been sipping on that. So yeah, so obviously there's the
So,
podcast.
yeah.
What episode then, or where do I start?
Wow. I have one that I did probably about 3 or 4 months ago called, I think it's just Beginning Stoicism, where I kind of go over the four main elements of it. So what I'm on 309 was my last one. So maybe probably about 10 episodes back, I think. Uh, One of my favorite ones, this is what I tell a lot of people, is 318, no, 218. It's about acceptance and an exercise I did there that is really good about accepting yourself. But I think where you are psychologically, you're in a good space for that. I often recommend that one to people who struggle with self-acceptance and really understand what that means and how to apply that practically. There was one book that got me into it, and it was mentioned from Tim Ferriss. This was about 8 years ago, and it was called A Guide to the Good Life: The Art of Stoic Joy. It's by
Mm.
William Irvine. He's a philosophy professor, and that was the first exposure I had to it, which was really good. Obviously, you can get meditations by Marcus Aurelius, anything by Epictetus and Seneca are fantastic, and they've been around for 2,000 years, so you can just find them open source. And Ryan Holiday is a good place to start. Obstacle is the Way is probably
Oh
one of
yeah.
my by him. Um, but he's got a whole number of them, and he's kind of he was instrumental for me really picking up a lot of things as well. But some of the core things to understand, are understanding what you can control and what you can't. That's a huge one right there, which I think a lot of people really struggle with because the only things you really have control over are your beliefs and your perspectives, your thinking, those type of things, the choices you make and the actions you take. That's it. Like you didn't even have control over your own body, as you well know. What happened to you, you didn't want it to happen. It just happened. And you can't
Mhm.
change what happened, but you can decide how you want to respond to how that happened.
Yep.
So that's a big thing. The other big thing is, talking about emotions, that by understanding that you can't control other people and letting go of those things, you're much better able to maintain your own emotional equilibrium because you take that moment before you want to snap at somebody and you go, I want to react to them, but is that going to be helpful? Let me try and respond to them. Let me take a moment and think about it,
Yeah.
and, they talk about like, your perspective is so important because you can't ever be offended unless you choose to be offended, you know, and they mentioned that several times. It's like you are only harmed if you choose to be harmed. Your mind is complicit in your own offense. And people have a hard time getting that. Like, no, no, no. What he said was really offensive. I'm like, if he said it in Swahili, would you have found it as offensive? Because he
Yeah.
said the same thing. You just didn't
Yeah.
understand. It was because you made an interpretation in your mind about it. You made a decision about what it meant and what it felt like to you. That's what actually caused that. Uh,
Hmm.
so those are a couple of big things. Another one is, let me think. Don't want to take up too much time on this, but I think if somebody's first tuning into this is their first listening up to an episode, it'd be really good for them. That well, kind of continuing on with that is that your thoughts are the things that cause your emotions. So most people think that emotions are something that just happens. They're uncontrollable. I felt it's just how I felt. It's like, well, no, you had some type of thought that happened that caused you to feel what you felt. And they'll be like,
Yeah.
no, 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 this thing just happened and that's what I felt. And I said, no, no, you made a judgment about that thing and that's what you felt. And I'm like, okay, let me give you a quick example. Say that you had a friend from high school. You guys were super tight, but over the years you lost touch. And you get a note from another mutual friend of yours that says, "Hey, by the way, I didn't know if you knew this, but John died 5 years ago." And suddenly you are just racked with grief. And you feel that pain, you're really upset, you feel that sadness that your friend John died, that you guys were close buds in high school. And the thing is that if it were truly just the circumstance, when John died, you should have felt grief. But it wasn't until you heard about him dying, you thought about what his death meant, and gave it some meaning about how much that he had been important to you and that you're going to miss him, that you felt those feelings.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think those are some of the core things. Then probably the biggest thing is to live a life of virtue, practice wisdom, practice justice, meaning how you treat other people, practice courage, and practice self-discipline. Those are the four cardinal virtues. And if you are living a life where you maximize those four things, you will be happy in any situation. You'll be able to overcome any struggle that happens to you. Because to them, that's the essence of what it means to live a good life, is to follow those four virtues.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I wrote down a lot of this stuff, and I'm gonna go back and search for that episode you mentioned. But um, all this is just aligns,
Yeah.
with 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 a lot of my beliefs and my thought processes, and how I like to show up and stuff. And so, you know, I think it's so true. I remember having this conversation, man, this was probably, gosh, I want to say like 6, 7 years ago. I happened to be in Philadelphia at this event, and there was this charity, and we were in like this like little theater, and I'm sitting there, and there's a kid that is part of this charity, and he's blind. And he's sitting there, and I go and I sit next to him, and we just spark up a conversation. And he's got personality, and so we're sitting there cutting up, both of us. And I remember he said, because I asked him, of course, his age and not being able to see and what are the challenges there. And he said, he said, a lot of the world looks at, what I have to live with as a disadvantage. He said, people feel sorry for me. He said, but honestly, I feel sorry for you guys. And I was like, all right, come on. They're like, "Look, come on, what do you mean?" And he said, well, he said, just take for example, like when I interact with somebody, he's like, I can't see them and make a judgment. He's like, I have to like listen to what that person's saying, and I have to like feel that person's energy. He said, "You guys that he's like everybody that can see. He's like lucky you guys that you guys can see." He's like, "But it also serves as a disadvantage because you guys are making judgments just because of what you see. You never even give yourself the opportunity to listen or to feel." And I was like, "Wow, you little shit. That is good. And you're so
Yeah,
right."
yeah,
And I just again one of those moments where it's like here's the teacher, if you will, me, JR, being taught, being the student, and being taught by a source that you would never think of as a teacher, a 12-year-old kid that is dropping wisdom, man. And I'm like, that's so true. And it's been one of those things that even I mean, I try again, I'm a human being, but I try when I come and have any sort of interaction contact with somebody, I try to lead with that mindset of like, okay, I need to be present, I need to listen, I need to feel, and that's when I make my judgment, right? On whatever that is, right? If I feel like, oh, don't want to, whatever. But it was just one of those just simple little reminders that really pierced for me. And it's been a lot of the, sort of the basis of how I like to show up for people because I mean, I remember there was a period of my life where all I wanted was for someone to really essentially remove those biases and just listen and show up and connect. And so yeah, man, it's you know, I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed, the life that I have and the life that I've created for myself. I created this life like because I was able to pay attention and lean in and not dismiss a lot of these beautiful lessons that were, and so I've been able to, put all these pieces together and create a great life for myself and for my family. Um, but at the end of the day, it all just goes back to like, how are you showing up every single day? And in order to better show up, you got to find ways and practices that are going to allow you um, to rejuvenate yourself and to replenish your own cup and to fill your own cup. And, so I'm always leaning into other people and trying to, get that from other individuals and other interactions that I have. But, I'm super blessed. I'm super blessed. And I know that a lot of people probably, and despite what they're going through right now, probably feel that they're not. And that's normal.
yeah,
And that is a human response because when you're going through it, it sucks. However, I can tell you that there is another end of it. And, but you do have to go through it and you do have to lean into it. And you can't just live this model of like, I'm just going to look for the blessings. You have to then, when things are, you have to trust and you have to say at the end of the day, as hard as it is, find those blessings and practice that gratitude in the most horrible situations that you can find yourself. There's always something. A- And the more you condition your brain to look at life that way, I think you're gonna always be able to find something beautiful despite whatever mess you find yourself in. So yeah, it's been fun, man. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to share, a little bit of my life with you and your audience. Um, I'll definitely be subscribing, man, and staying in touch and following, sort of your journey and kind of where you're going and where life's taking you. But this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate it too. It's been very enjoyable. It's not every day that I get to talk to somebody who's, you know, been in your situation, but it's for me, it's really amazing to see that that you took that, that you took that, like you said, that clean slate and went, all right, I can do something with this. Because a lot of people wouldn't. There'd be plenty of people who'd just be giving up. They'd be drinking, doing drugs, whatever. And, when you're in that situation, it's kind of like you either sink or swim. And you
Yeah.
decided to swim. And I'm really impressed with that. So good on you.
Wow. Thank you, brother. Appreciate that, man.
All right. So that's the end of this week's Stoic Coffee Break. It was really a pleasure talking with J.R. Martinez. And as always, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and thanks for listening. And if you aren't following me on social media, I would really appreciate it if you would. You can find me at stoic.coffee on Threads and Instagram, or at Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, at Stoic Coffee, all one word. Thanks again for listening.